Test your English with this video. Today I'm going to go through all the levels of English, starting at A1 beginner up to A2 upper beginner, then to B1 intermediate. After that I'm going to move up to B2 upper intermediate. Then we will get to the more difficult levels of C1 advanced. And then right at the end, I'm going to try and do C2 upper advanced. So let's see how good your English listening skills are.
What is your name?
My name is James.
Okay, and where are you from? James?
I'm from the UK.
Okay. What is your favorite color?
My favorite color is blue.
Can you swim?
Yes, I can swim.
What did you do last weekend?
Last weekend, I walked my dog. I went to the gym and I saw some friends.
Have you ever visited another country?
Yes, I have visited many other countries. Actually, I have visited 35 different countries.
And how often do you exercise?
I exercise around 3 or 4 times a week.
What are the advantages of learning English?
There are many different advantages of learning English. First of all, it can help with your career opportunities. When you have a good level of English, it means that you get more work opportunities. Also, when you have a decent level of English, you can travel to different places and you can make connections with people all over the world.
Do you prefer city life or country life, and why?
Personally, I prefer city life because there is just a lot more interesting things to do. The problem with country life is that it can be a little bit isolating sometimes. It can be a bit isolating and there are not many things to do. So overall, I prefer city life.
Do you think the government should limit social media use for children?
Obviously, this is a nuanced question and there are no clear answers to this question. But overall, I personally think yes, because I don't think that it's particularly healthy for children to be using social media like Facebook or TikTok. First of all, it's not very healthy for their attention spans, and it's just going to end up causing a large number of problems for their attention spans. And so, in my personal view, I would personally say it is an overall kind of net negative. I think there's no real need for children under the ages of 12 or 13 to really be using social media, honestly.
And then what are the disadvantages of working remotely?
Well, I have worked remotely many times in my life and I can tell you that there is quite a large number of disadvantages to working remotely. You don't get the same kind of camaraderie that you do in the office. When you work in an office, you can build relationships with your colleagues and your boss in a face-to-face manner. Whereas when you are working remotely, you don't get quite the same ability to build relationships as you do while working face-to-face. So that's one major disadvantage of working remotely, I would say.
To what extent does advertising shape consumer consumer behavior?
In fact, there are a myriad of different answers I could potentially give for this question. But overall, I suppose my conclusion is that absolutely yes, advertising does indeed impact consumer behavior. For example, one technique that advertisers tend to use is using aspirational imagery. Imagery that makes people want to aspire to become something better. When the consumers are aspiring to become something above themselves, they are more likely then to go and purchase a product, the product that's being advertised in the advert. Another popular advertising techniques that advertisers use is something called association, whereby advertisers connect or link a particular emotion with their product. If you take Coca-Cola, for instance, they'll try to connect or link the emotions of happiness and joy and friendship along with the brand of Coca-Cola. In the psychology of the consumer, this leads them to associate the brand of Coca-Cola with positive emotions.
How does language influence identity?
Obviously, this is an incredibly profound and complex question, one that is incredibly challenging to answer. But one example that comes to mind is actually in the language of Vietnamese. For example, in the language of Vietnamese, you actually give people different titles based on their age. Somebody who is, for example, 10 years older than you will get a certain title, whereas somebody who's 20 years older than you will get a different title. And in this way, the language of Vietnamese actually influences the culture of Vietnam and potentially causes people to actually respect their elders to a greater amount, because whenever they use their language, they are constantly forced to use a particular title when referring to somebody of a particular age. So that is just one example of how language can actually potentially influence somebody's identity.
Does democracy inherently depend on informed citizens?
Yes, to a significant degree, democracy depends on informed citizens, because democratic systems assume that people have the capability to make rational political choices. Voting is not merely just personal preference, it is a collective decision-making mechanism that shapes our institutions and national priorities. If citizens lack the ability to access correct information, democracy can become vulnerable to things like populism, manipulation, and emotional rhetoric.
Should art be judged independently of the artist's personal conduct?
This is a deeply controversial issue, one that has no universal answer. On the one hand, art can indeed be viewed separately from the individual who created it, but once a piece of art enters the public sphere, it may acquire meanings and emotional significance that transcend the artist's original intentions. A novel, painting, or film can possess immense artistic value entirely separate from the creator's original intentions. Judging exclusively through the lens of personal conduct risks reducing the artist's achievements to just an ethical biography. How much English did you understand? If you want videos at all levels of English, we have videos at every level on EnglishSponge.com, where you can listen to English content at the correct level for you. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.